Genesis 19, an exegetical and biblical-theological commentary. Introduction, the narrative context in the Promise Plan. Within the organic, progressively unfolding architecture of Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan of God, Genesis chapter 19 serves as a profound historical and theological pivot. Following the disinheritance of the nations at Babel in Genesis 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 32 verses 8 through 9, and the initiation of the redemptive covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah functions as a prophetic prototype of divine justice. The narrative highlights the intersection of the seen and unseen realms, demonstrating God's sovereign administration of justice through his heavenly agents. The events of Genesis 19 are inextricably linked to the preceding chapter. Abraham's conversation with God the evening before the destruction is structured as a legal proceeding where a moral threshold is established. When that threshold, 10 righteous people, cannot be met, the ensuing judgment proceeds with the surgical precision of a divine verdict being executed. Section 1. Exegesis of Genesis 19. A. The angelic visitation and the violation of order, verses 1 through 11. The arrival of the messengers in verses 1 through 3. A significant numerical discrepancy links chapters 18 and 19. 3 men walked away from Abraham's tent, but only 2 of them ever arrived in Sodom. These 2 figures are explicitly recognized by the ancient audience as divine messengers, angels operating within the administrative hierarchy of the divine council. The transgression of boundaries in verses 4 through 11. The men of the city surround Lot's house, demanding that the visitors be brought out that we may know them. The language here is very clearly sexual in nature. Beyond the immediate horror of attempted homosexual rape, ancient Jewish and early Christian readers understood this event as a horrific violation of the proper order between heaven and earth, between the seen and the unseen realm. This transgressive crossing of cosmic boundaries shares the same rebellious architecture as the Watcher's sin in Genesis chapter 6. B. The surgical execution of divine judgment, verses 12 through 25. The evacuation of the remnant in verses 12 through 23, the angels physically handle Lot and his family, actively pulling them from the impending destruction. This physical intervention underscores that God's preservation of the righteous is as deliberate as his judgment of the wicked. The binatarian action of Yahweh in verse 24, the text records a fascinating grammatical anomaly. Then the Lord, Yahweh, rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord Yahweh out of heaven. This odd phrasing, Yahweh acting on earth to rain fire from Yahweh in heaven, was recognized by ancient Jewish scholars as an early indication of complex divine plurality, the 2 powers in heaven motif, functioning within Orthodox Israelite theology. The nature of the overthrow in verse 25. The Hebrew word hapak, often translated as overthrew or destroyed, denotes the annihilation of the cities. The destruction of Sodom was not chaos, nor was it a random coincidence of cosmic timing. Rather, it was the conclusion of a deliberate moral process carried out through a physical instrument of staggering power directed with divine precision. C. The backward glance and the preservation of lineage, verses 26 through 38. The consequence of looking back in verse 26. In one of the most haunting details of the narrative, Lot's wife stops, turns, and looks back. Her transformation into a pillar of salt signifies the lethal danger of clinging to the anti-Edenic idolatry of the world when God has provided a path of deliverance. The origin of Moab and Ammon in verses 30 through 38. The chapter concludes with the incestuous origins of the Moabites and Ammonites through Lot's daughters. Interestingly, the text utilizes the Hebrew term for firstborn to describe Lot's older daughter, a designation typically reserved for male heirs, highlighting the cultural and familial desperation of the survivors. Section 2. New Testament appropriations of Genesis 19. The apostolic writers organically connect the historical destruction of Sodom to eschatological realities, demonstrating that the ancient text continues to inform the Promise Plan's trajectory toward final restoration. In Luke chapter 10, verse 12, Jesus employs the historical reality of Sodom and Gomorrah as a typological baseline to warn of the severe eschatological judgment awaiting cities that reject his messengers and the inauguration of the kingdom of God. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 6 through 7 and Jude verse 7, both Peter and Jude explicitly link the sexual immorality and unnatural desires of Sodom back to the supernatural transgression of the angels in Genesis chapter 6. They read the Old Testament natively, recognizing that Sodom's ultimate crime was the illicit violation of the boundaries between the human and divine domains, theological synthesis. When read through the text-immanent lens of the Promise Plan, Genesis 19 is recovered not as an isolated mythological catastrophe, but as a crucial historical demonstration of Yahweh's covenantal justice and his sovereign administration over cosmic geography. The destruction of Sodom reveals a creator who actively maintains the moral architecture of his universe, intervening with surgical precision to judge the profound compounding rebellions of both human and spiritual actors. Yet simultaneously, Yahweh displays immense grace in preserving a righteous remnant. This localized judgment serves as a prophetic foreshadowing of the final eschatological cleansing of the cosmic temple, assuring God's people that the powers of darkness and human depravity will ultimately be eradicated, making way for the New Jerusalem, where righteousness and unmediated divine presence will be eternally restored.